All right, our last review before we get into the actual Digits 8 lessons. So here we're talking about one-step equations. These were covered in your 7th grade course, and we're going to go over why they work. So we have some key properties, kind of like in that last lesson we talked about the substitution property. Here we have different properties that say that this is why we can do what we do. So the addition property of equality, this just means to add equally to both sides. So you may have talked about last year, what you do to one side, you do to the other side. That's what we're doing. We're trying to keep our equation balanced. So if you think of the equal sign as the balance on a scale, we're trying to keep both sides the same. Subtraction property of equality, that's just subtracting equally from both sides. And so I refer to the addition property of equality as APOE and the subtraction property of equality as SPOE. From here, oops. All right, from here we also have our multiplication property of equality, which means to multiply both sides equally. And I call that MPOE, multiplication property of equality. And our division property of equality means to divide both sides equally. And I call that DPOE, or depot. And so we use these to solve our equations. So these are just one-step equations. So like, here's our first one. My goal is to make, my goal with adding and subtracting my goal is to make 0. So I'm wanting to zero this out. So I'm going to think of this as a -4. Remember when we talked about integers that I kept saying like a negative is subtraction, subtraction is negative. So yes, we would read this x minus 4, but remember we could also make this x plus a -4 equals 5, right? So either way you want to think about it. But what I do know is to make a -0, I've got to add a positive. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides because that's going to make this 0. And so I'm using this addition property of equality. And so then x will equal 9 because 9 minus 4 is 5. I know for some of the, or for most of these, you can do these in your head. The reason I show it like this is so that you understand when we get to harder level equations, why what we do works. So that's why we do it with the simple equations. All right, so here's our next one. It is y plus 2. I want to make the plus 2 0, so I'm going to subtract 2. What do I do to one side? I have to do equally to the other side. So here we're using that subtraction property of equality. And so I'm going to get y equals, and 10 minus 2 is 8. And you should know that 8 plus 2 equals 10, but this is one way that we solve it, or can solve it. And what we will need to do when we go to two-step equations. All right, so remember a fraction is division. So if you don't know that right now, fraction is division. All right. And then with multiplication and division, when we are multiplying or dividing, our goal is to get it to equal 1. We want 1 times our variable. So here, to get 1c, the opposite of dividing by 3 would be to multiply by 3. And so then these will divide out because we're going to technically have 3 over 1 times c over 3. So our 3's will divide out. And we're left with 1c equals, and 4 times 3 is 12. And then if we think back, what I can do to check is I can say, okay, well, 12 divided by 3 should equal 4. Oh, it does equal 4. And so that's how I check. We just plug it back in using that substitution property. But our answer is c equals 12. And in order to get that, we use that multiplication property of equality to get there. All right. I believe this is our last one. So here we have multiplication. The way we make multiplication in make that 6t into 1t is that I'm going to divide both sides. And really it comes down to inverse operations. Division is the inverse operation to multiplication. Subtraction is the inverse operation to addition, or the opposite operation. All right, so 6 divided by 6 is 1, so we're left with t. And then 42 divided by 6 is 7. And if I want to double check, then I'm going to say 6 times 7 should equal 42. And that is true. And so t is 7. And we got there by using depot, the division property of equality. So that's our properties in a simplified form, solving one-step equations. We're going to keep using those as we continue solving equations in our mathematics. So until next time, 8th graders, peace out.